In early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was in crisis. In the Balkans, the Greek population revolted against the occupying Turks, resulting in the Greek War of Independence. The Sultan requested aid from Muhammad Ali Pasha, the governor of Egypt, to suppress the rebellion. However, he was defeated by an intervention of the European powers at Navarino. In compensation for this loss, Muhammad Ali demanded the territory of Syria. The Ottomans were indifferent to the request, and Muhammad Ali prepared for a conquest of Syria. Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt is recorded as planning to extend his rule to the Ottoman Empire's Syrian provinces as early as 1812, secretly telling the British consul of his designs on the territory that year. This desire was left on hold, however, as he consolidated his rule over Egypt, modernizing its government administration, public services, and armed forces, and suppressing various rebellions, including Mamluk and Wahhabi uprisings on behalf of Sultan Mahmud II. In 1825, the Sultan again called on Muhammad Ali to suppress a local uprising, this time a nationalist revolution by Greek Christians. He was promised rule over Crete, Cyprus, and the Morea, the modern Peloponnese, for his services. His son, Ibrahim Pasha, won quick victories at the head of a conscript army and controlled nearly the entire Peloponnesian peninsula within 10 months of his arrival in February 1825. The Greeks continued guerrilla operations, however, and by September 1827 public opinion in Russia, Britain, and France forced the great powers to intervene in favor of the Greeks. The joint British-Russian-French fleet destroyed Muhammad Ali's fleet that October at the Battle of Navarino, and Ibrahim's forces were expelled from the Morea a year later following the arrival of a French expeditionary force and a settlement negotiated by the European powers. Once Ibrahim and his forces returned from Greece, preparations to wrest control of Syria began in earnest. The governor of Acre, Abdullah Pasha ibn Ali, was harboring fugitives of the Egyptian draft and was said to have refused a request to contribute towards Muhammad Ali's war effort. With these insults as pretext, land and sea forces under the command of Ibrahim Pasha were sent north to besiege Acre in October 1831. The city fell to Ibrahim's army 6 months later in May 1832. After Acre, he continued on to win control of Homs, Beirut, Sidon, Tripoli, and Damascus. The armies sent by the Sultan and various local governors were unable to check Ibrahim's forces, notably at the Battle of Homs, considered to have decided the fate of Syria. Having triumphed in Homs, Ibrahim occupied Hama and Aleppo, heading for the Belan Pass, situated between Antakya and Skanderun. This pass was the key to the heart of Ottoman Turkey, Asia Minor. The then ongoing Tanzimat reforms of Mahmud II had experienced significant difficulties in adopting the innovative military methods of conscription and mass drill then being implemented in European armies, but Muhammad Ali had managed to adopt both. Ibrahim's overwhelming success cannot be attributed only to modern organization, however. His officers had significantly more experience than their Ottoman counterparts, having borne the brunt of fighting in the empire's two most recent major wars against the Wahhabi and Greek rebellions, and he attracted significant local support to his cause by calling his campaign one for liberation from the Turkish yoke. With the provinces of Greater Syria under his control, the Egyptian army continued their campaign into Anatolia in late 1832. On November 21, 1832, the Egyptian forces occupied the city of Konya in central Turkey, within striking distance of the imperial capital of Constantinople. The Sultan organized a new army of 80,000 men under Reshid Mem Pasha, the Grand Vizier, in a last-ditch attempt to block Ibrahim's advance towards the capital. While Ibrahim commanded a force of 50,000 men, most of them were spread out along his supply lines from Cairo, and he had only 15,000 in Konya. The final battle of the campaign of 1831-1832 came at Konya on December 18 to 21, 1832. Several minor clashes between advanced elements and scouting parties of the two armies took place on December 18 and 19. The main battle took place on December 21, 1832, astride the Konya-Constantinople road, just north of the ancient walled town of Konya, which, in 1832, had a population of about 20,000. The battlefield is bounded on the west by hills and on the east by marshes and swamps, with a plateau about 3 kilometers wide in between. The Egyptian army had its back to the town and faced north, and the Ottoman army approached from the north astride the road, facing south. December 21st was an intensely foggy day. Ibrahim's army was organized into 3 rows astride the road. The first row consisted of the 13th and 18th Infantry Regiments, with 3 artillery batteries under Sila Melmanstali. The second row, 500 paces behind the first, consisted of the 12th and 14th Infantry Regiments with 2 artillery batteries under Solomon AI Faransoy. The third row consisted of the Guards Regiment and 1 artillery battery in reserve and the 1st and 2nd Cavalry Regiment under Selim Bey. Ibrahim posted 2 battalions in square formation at the flanks to guard against encirclement. Reshid's army was organized into 4 rows, advancing astride the road. Leading the advance were 2 regular cavalry brigades and the Guards Infantry Brigade in open formation. These were followed by a second row of 2 infantry and 2 cavalry brigades, then a third and fourth row, each consisting of an infantry brigade. Large numbers of irregulars made up the rear. Artillery was distributed amongst the army. At about noon, the advancing Ottomans' artillery opened fire when the front lines were about 550 meters apart. With the heavy fog, the range was spotty, and the Egyptian artillery held their fire until they could guess the Ottomans' positions from the sound of their cannonade, and so could find their range more precisely. As the artillery exchange thundered on, Ibrahim advanced with his scouts to a well east of the road to survey the Ottoman positions. During a momentary lifting of the fog, he noticed a gap in the Ottoman formation between their cavalry and infantry on their left flank to the east. He rapidly called his reserves the Guards Brigade and the 2 cavalry brigades and personally led them into this gap between the road and the marshes, causing confusion in the Ottoman left flank by this sudden onslaught, as some of their cavalry was trapped and scattered in the foggy marshes. As the Ottoman left flank collapsed, the Grand Vizier Reshid Pasha personally moved to their midst to rally them, but in the foggy confusion found himself surrounded by Egyptians and captured. The capture of their supreme commander deepened the confusion amongst the Ottomans, and some units lost cohesion and broke ranks as the Egyptian artillery and cavalry advanced around their left flank to their rear, enveloping the now disorganized units and continuing a relentless slaughter from 3 directions: south, east, and north. As night fell, the new Ottoman commander managed to rally some units and organized a desperate counter-attack from the west against the Egyptian left flank, but this failed as the Egyptians sent a wheel to face them with an organized barrage of artillery, and as this attack broke, the remaining Ottomans scattered. Konya was Ibrahim's greatest victory. He lost 262 dead and 530 wounded, whereas the Ottomans lost 3,000 dead and over 5,000 taken prisoner, including many senior officers, including Reshid Mem Pasha. The Egyptians remained in possession of the field and took 46 guns, and the Ottoman army was scattered. Nothing remained between Ibrahim's army and Constantinople after the battle. With no military forces between the Egyptian army and Constantinople, the Ottomans suffered a humiliating defeat by the hands of the Egyptians. Egypt had conquered almost all of Turkey besides the city of Constantinople, where severe winter weather forced him to make camp at Konya long enough for the Sublime Porte to conclude an alliance with Russia and for Russian forces to arrive in Anatolia, blocking his route to the capital. The arrival of the Russian power would prove to be too great a challenge for Ibrahim's army to overcome. Wary of Russia's expanding influence in the Ottoman Empire and its potential to upset the balance of power, French and British pressure forced Muhammad Ali and Ibrahim to agree to the Convention of Kudahaya. Under the settlement, the Syrian provinces were ceded to Egypt, and Ibrahim Pasha was made the Governor-General of the region. The treaty left Muhammad Ali a nominal vassal of the Sultan. 6 years later, when Muhammad Ali moved to declare de jure independence, the Sultan declared him a traitor and sent an army to confront Ibrahim Pasha, launching the Second Egyptian-Ottoman War. After the Convention of Kudahaya that ended the First Ottoman-Egyptian War, the Ottoman Empire ceded Syria to Muhammad Ali Pasha. After this concession, Muhammad Ali moved on to proclaim independence, which angered the Sublime Porte, who called him a traitor. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire prepared an army to go and recapture Syria, which had been lost 6 years earlier. This action triggered the Second Ottoman-Egyptian War. The war was the climax of the long power struggle between the Ottoman Empire and the Pasha of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, which had reached a point of crisis that threatened to destabilize the whole of the Levant. On June 24, 1839, the Ottoman army, accompanied by the infamous Helmuth von Moltke the Elder, invaded Syria and reached Nezib, where they would encounter the opposing Egyptians. The two armies were well equipped and balanced. The number of soldiers in each army was approximately 40,000 men, supported by artillery and knights. Constantine Basile says, since he applied European tactics in the East, he has never met in the battlefield of Aiva better than these two armies. In terms of training the Egyptian army, he was trained in the latest military methods in terms of organizing ranks, speed of movement and maneuvering, the presence of Suleiman Pasha the French as chief of staff of the Egyptian army, and the leadership of Ibrahim Pasha, who became an expert on how to defeat the Ottoman armies years ago. On the other hand, the Ottoman army enjoyed the preference in terms of preparation, as the Ottoman army was better supplied and had rested for several weeks in its camp. Unlike the Egyptian soldiers who were exhausted by the march to meet the Ottoman army under the heat of the sun at the beginning of the summer, the two armies were close together. Hafez Pasha, the commander of the Ottoman army, spent an entire month digging trenches and establishing strongholds and fortresses, and his army was flexible to defend and attack in that region, and there was a difference between those who stood to defend and those assigned to attack, as the attack is undoubtedly more difficult. The Ottoman army was composed mainly of recently subdued Kurdish conscripts, and their morale was low. But Ibrahim Pasha's army was more complete and more combat-oriented. Ibrahim Pasha and his chief of staff, Suleiman Pasha Ali, had one opinion, while Hafez Pasha and his chief of staff Moltke had two different opinions. Ibrahim Pasha's officers respected and feared him, and all of them had earned their ranks from his wall and merit. As for the officers of the Turkish army, most of them were among the leaders of the rulers and ministers in Istanbul. One story narrates how Hafez Pasha, the commander of the Ottoman army, asked a prisoner from Ibrahim Pasha's army his opinion in the two camps. Then the Egyptian prisoner told him after Hafez Pasha gave him safety. Ibrahim Pasha's camp is a soldier's camp. As for your camp, it is like the pilgrim's strikes. In Ibrahim's camp, you only see soldiers with their weapons, besides their horses and cannons. As for your camp, I saw the Jews, merchants, scholars, and jurists. Your camp is like pilgrimage rackets. Several hours prior to when the major combat began, von Moltke had pleaded Hafez Pasha to withdraw to a more secure and fortified position near Birasik and to await expected reinforcements, as Hafez Pasha's forces were outmatched in quality by the advancing Egyptians. Initially, Hafez acquiesced to Moltke, but not long after he decided to maintain his army's position due to the advice of his mullahs. The Ottoman troops under Hafez Pasha were positioned at Mezar, southwest of Nezib, with the Nezib River on their left. Ibrahim advanced his force, under heavy Ottoman artillery fire, towards the Ottoman lines. At the same time, the Ottoman line began to take Egyptian artillery fire and was suffering losses. By the time Ibrahim's infantry had encountered the Ottoman line, Hafez's army was in complete rout, the Egyptian artillery having broken their morale. This threatened to place Constantinople itself and the rule of the entire eastern Mediterranean within his grasp. A few days after the battle, the Ottoman Sultan, Mahmud II, died, leaving his empire in the hands of his 16-year-old heir, Abdülmecid. Meanwhile, the Ottoman fleet had defected to Muhammad Ali. Britain, Russia and Austria were all pledged to support the tottering Ottoman Empire and to force Muhammad Ali, who had the support of France and Spain, to withdraw from Syria. Although the new Sultan's ministers moved to resolve the crisis by offering to cede the rule of Syria to Muhammad Ali, the British, Austrian and Russian ambassadors forced them to rescind this offer and stand firm against him. There was even a possibility of war with France, who looked to Muhammad Ali's success to increase its sphere of influence in the Near East. In June 1840, Admiral Sir Robert Stopford, commanding the British Mediterranean Fleet, sent Commodore Charles Napier with a small squadron to the Syrian, now the Lebanese coast. He was then ordered to proceed to Beirut to compel the Egyptians to withdraw. The situation on the ground was extremely volatile and called for quick and decisive action. This Napier provided, acting as if his was an entirely independent command. On August 11, 1840, Napier's ships appeared off Beirut and he called upon Suleiman Pasha, Muhammad Ali's governor, to abandon the town and leave Syria, whose population shortly revolted against Muhammad Ali's occupying army. With such a small force, there was little that Napier could do against 15,000 Egyptian troops until September, when Stopford's ships joined up with him. Open war broke out on September 11th, when Napier bombarded Beirut and effected a landing at Juni with 1,500 Turks and Marines to operate against Ibrahim, who was prevented by the revolt from doing more than trying to hold the coastal cities. Due to the illness of the Brigadier General of the Army, Sir Charles Smith, Napier was instructed to command the land force and made a successful sortie against a force of Albanians at Nahr el-Kalb. He then, with a mixed squadron of British, Turkish and Austrian ships, bombarded Sidon on September 26th and landed with the storming column. Sidon capitulated in 2 days. While preparing to attack the Egyptian positions on the heights of Bohas, Napier received an order to retire from the command of the land forces to make way for Brigadier General Smith, who had recovered from his illness, and also had received command of the Turkish force in the Allied army. To do this, Napier would need to retreat from his position. He decided to disobey the order and continued with the attack against Ibrahim's army. The fighting on October 9th was furious, but victory was secured. Napier then left the land forces to Smith. Meanwhile, the Egyptians had abandoned Beirut on October 3rd. The fleet was then instructed to retake Acre, which was the only coastal position left in Egyptian hands. The Mediterranean fleet, commanded by Stopford and supported by small Austrian and Turkish squadrons, moved into position against the western and southern sides of Acre on November 3rd to 4 and opened fire at 2 p.m. The ships anchored closer to the shore than expected, at 450 to 800 meters, and the Egyptian guns were aimed too high. The fire of the ships was devastatingly accurate thanks to the training associated with the Royal Navy's new gunnery school, HMS Excellent. The Egyptians had no opportunity to correct their error. Their guns were disabled by direct hits and by the walls of the fortifications falling on their crews. The sailing ships of the line were in 2 lines, with steamers maneuvering in between. At 4:20 p.m., a shell penetrated the main magazine in the south of the city, which exploded, killing 1,100 men. The guns ashore fell silent, and that night the city was occupied. British losses were light, 18 men killed and 41 wounded. The ships had fired 48,000 rounds. The rapid collapse of Muhammad Ali's power, with the prospect of bloody chaos in Egypt, was not part of the Allies' plan, and Stopford sent Napier to command the squadron at Alexandria and to observe the situation. Here, acting independently again, he appeared before the city with part of his squadron on November 25th and enforced a blockade. Then, without reference to his admiral or the British government, he personally negotiated a peace with Muhammad Ali, guaranteeing him and his heirs the sovereignty of Egypt, and pledging to evacuate Ibrahim's beleaguered army back to Alexandria if Muhammad Ali in turn renounced all claims to Syria, submitted to the Sultan and returned the Ottoman fleet. Stopford and the British ambassador were furious with this outcome. Stopford repudiated it immediately when he had heard the news, and several of the Allied powers declared it void. Despite Napier's long-standing personal friendship with Lord Palmerston, the arrangement was at first announced by the British government, but the formal treaty later concluded and confirmed by the Sultan used Napier's original as the basis for negotiations and differed from it only in minor ways. Muhammad Ali was to withdraw immediately his forces from Syria, Arabia, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, Crete, and the district of Adana, all within the Ottoman Empire.